There's a strange kind of magic in falling apart, when the world expects you to crumble in silence, to bleed behind closed doors, and to smile like nothing happened. Choosing to show the ache is the most rebellious thing you can do. Vulnerability is not about oversharing or seeking pity. It's about standing in your truth even when your voice trembles. It's about telling the story before someone else tries to write it for you. Pain arrives like an unexpected guest, loud, messy, and inconvenient. It doesn't knock politely. It barges in, flipping the table, leaving the floor littered with shattered moments. And in that chaos, there's a decision to be made. Cover the mess with a rug and pretend it never happened, or sit in the wreckage long enough to understand what each broken piece was trying to say. Vulnerability chooses the latter. There's a power in saying, yes, this hurt me. A power in letting the world see the mascara-streaked cheeks and the late-night journal pages soaked in uncertainty. Vulnerability doesn't chase perfection. It whispers, this is me, unfiltered, unpolished, but real. And in that rawness, a different kind of beauty blooms, one that doesn't rely on symmetry or smooth edges, but on soul and sincerity. It's easy to mistake vulnerability for weakness. We're taught to armor up, to smile wider when we're breaking inside, to shrink our emotions into polite sound bites. But what if letting people see the cracks is the real act of courage? What if the tears weren't shameful, but sacred? What if the way through isn't around the pain, but straight through it? Unflinching, eyes open. To choose vulnerability is to take ownership of your story. It's writing the heartbreak into a song, not to wallow in it, but to release it, to bleed in verses and stitch yourself back together in choruses. It's standing on a stage and singing the truth you once tried to bury. Because every time the truth is spoken, even in a whisper, it loosens the grip of shame. It tells others, you're not alone. There's a line between being open and being performative, and true vulnerability never crosses into performance. It isn't curated for applause, it's quiet. It's the hand trembling over the piano keys, the voice cracking on a lyric, the silence between the words where the hurt still breathes. And yet, somehow those moments hold more weight than the loudest screams. Because they're real, because they're brave. The most fragile feelings are often the most universal. Loneliness, rejection, betrayal, they speak in a language that needs no translation. And when one person dares to say, I feel this, it gives permission to millions more to say, me too. That's the ripple effect of vulnerability. It turns isolation into connection and silence into solidarity. Sometimes people will try to use your vulnerability against you. They'll twist your honesty into weapons, but here's the thing. When you've already embraced your pain, it can't be used to shame you. When you've turned your story into a song, no one can silence it. Owning your truth disarms the world's judgment. You stop hiding, and in doing so, you step into a power that can't be faked or stolen. The ones who dare to feel deeply are often the ones who create the most enduring art, because their work doesn't just entertain, it heals. It tells the listener, the reader, the viewer, your pain has a place, your feelings are valid, you are seen. Vulnerability doesn't guarantee comfort. In fact, it's often uncomfortable, but it guarantees depth. It guarantees authenticity. It strips away the gloss and leaves you with something far more valuable, connection. And in a world obsessed with perfection, being real is a revolutionary act. There comes a moment when the silence becomes too loud, when the headlines write stories that never ask for permission, when whispers turn into roars and the truth is nowhere to be found. In that moment, there's a fork in the road. One path leads to hiding, the other to reclaiming. And choosing to reclaim the narrative is choosing to step out of the shadows pen in hand, saying, if I'm going to be a character in this story, I might as well be the author. The world doesn't always ask for your version. It's quick to draw conclusions, to take one chapter and claim it defines the whole book. But just because someone else says it louder doesn't make it truer. When the story is being told wrong, there's power in standing up and rewriting it in your own words, even if your voice shakes, because that's when it matters most. Reclaiming the narrative isn't about proving everyone wrong. It's about choosing what parts of yourself you want to carry forward. It's refusing to be boxed in by labels that don't fit. It's taking the moments that were supposed to break you and turning them into blueprints for how you built yourself back. People may always try to define you by your worst day, your biggest heartbreak, your loudest misstep, but they don't get the final word unless you hand it to them. There's something poetic about turning public pain into personal power, about watching the same story that tried to define you become the soil where growth begins. When people speak over you, reclaiming your narrative is turning down the noise and turning up the truth. It's pulling the mic back into your hands, even when they said you weren't allowed to hold it in the first place. In a world that thrives on scandal, on reduction, on half-truths told in bold font, choosing to share your side isn't just courageous, it's revolutionary. And sharing doesn't mean justifying. It doesn't mean explaining your every move to satisfy someone else's curiosity. It means owning your story so completely that no one else can weaponize it. When you reclaim your narrative, you're not asking for permission. You're not seeking validation. You're saying, this is what happened, this is how I lived it, this is who I became because of it. There's a quiet kind of strength in choosing to tell the truth on your own terms. It's not always loud. It might show up in the form of a bridge in a song, a line in a journal, or a glance in an interview that speaks volumes without saying a word. But it's there. It's the moment the script flips and the role of victim turns into that of the narrator. The one who doesn't just survive the story, but owns it. Sometimes people mistake silence for surrender. They think if you haven't responded, you've accepted the version they created for you. But there's a difference between staying quiet and staying still. Reclaiming the narrative often happens behind the scenes first. It's in the processing and the healing and the rewriting of your inner dialogue before the outer world hears a single word. It's also knowing you don't owe everyone the whole story. You owe it to yourself to tell the truth, but not necessarily to hand it out freely. Reclaiming your narrative means you decide what gets shared, what stays sacred, and what you've outgrown. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say that version of me no longer exists and not feel guilty for it. The narrative isn't just the story told in interviews or written on blogs. It's the one you carry inside, the one you repeat to yourself at midnight, the one that shapes how you see yourself in the mirror. That's the one that matters, and when you reclaim it, everything else follows. Because once you've taken the pen back, no one else gets to write your ending. There's something hauntingly beautiful about the way pain can be transformed, the way it can rise, smoke-stained and shaking, and still find its way into something that glows. Heartbreak doesn't just shatter, it leaves embers behind. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, you can hear the whisper, build something from this. The ashes don't mark the end, they mark the place where creation begins. Pain is a strange muse. It doesn't knock gently or come dressed in light. It crashes in like a storm, wild and unapologetic. But inside that chaos, there's a palette of colors you never knew existed. Shades of sadness, hues of anger, flickers of grief, and glimmers of hope. Emotions so layered and raw, they demand expression. Not for attention, not for applause, but because the soul can't carry it all in silence. So it pours out into melodies, into lyrics, into brush strokes and stories and midnight notes scribbled in the margins. Creating art from ashes means refusing to let the pain rot in your chest. It's choosing to exhale it into something tangible, something that can be held, heard, felt. It's turning the thing that was meant to destroy you into something that sets you free. The process isn't clean, it's messy and slow and sometimes unbearable, but creation rarely comes from comfort. The best art, the most lasting art, often blooms from heartbreak. There's a kind of fire that only pain can light. It doesn't just burn, it illuminates. It reveals truths that were hiding in plain sight, the patterns, the choices, the wounds that needed tending. And once seen, they can't be unseen. Creating from that place isn't about glorifying the suffering, it's about honoring the transformation. Saying, this hurt, but it didn't end me, it made me. When the world tries to reduce your story to a headline, art becomes a reclamation. A way to say what can't be spoken, a way to show the complexity behind the collapse. The melody carries the tears you didn't cry, the metaphor holds the secrets you weren't ready to share. Every line becomes a breadcrumb leading back to your strength. Sometimes people ask how songs can be so specific and still feel universal. It's because pain speaks a language that everyone understands, even if the dialect is different. When you take your ache and craft it into art, it becomes a bridge. Suddenly, what was isolating becomes connecting. What was lonely becomes shared. That's the magic, turning something deeply personal into something deeply communal. Creating art from ashes isn't a one-time act. It's a habit, a ritual, a way of breathing when the air feels too heavy. You learn how to take the sharpness and turn it into structure. You learn how to hold a moment still long enough to wrap words around it. Some days the art comes easy. Other days it's carved out one painful syllable at a time, but it comes because the need to release, to express, to find meaning in the mess, it never really leaves. Even in the moments when the world sees only the shine, there's often soot underneath. A reminder of the fire you walked through to get here. The beauty isn't in the perfection, it's in the resilience. The fact that something was born out of the burn, that the wound didn't just bleed, it bloomed. People forget that ashes are what's left after the fire has done its worst. They're proof that something fierce happened here, and choosing to build from them, to write from them, to sing from them, it's an act of quiet rebellion, an act of alchemy, of taking what was broken and making it art, of turning endings into origin stories, of choosing to rise, not in spite of the ruin, but because of it. Change rarely comes dressed in comfort. It doesn't arrive with a welcome note or a warning. It tends to show up when the world feels like it's falling apart, not when things are falling into place. Evolution through adversity is the art of becoming something new because you had no other choice. It's growth that isn't graceful, it's gritty. It happens in the aftermath, in the shadows, in the spaces where everything familiar disappears. There's a certain kind of person who doesn't just survive the storm. They learn how to dance in the rain, not because it's fun, not because they wanted to, but because standing still wasn't an option, because movement, forward, upward, inward, was the only way through. Adversity strips everything away. It exposes what's underneath, the glitter, the image, the expectations. And when there's nothing left to hide behind, that's where the real self begins to emerge. The moments that bring you to your knees are often the ones that teach you how to stand taller. The rejections, the betrayals, the missteps, they burn, but they also clear the way. They make space for something better to grow. Reinvention isn't a costume change. It's not a new haircut or a fresh set list. It's internal. It's painful, it's deliberate, and it's necessary. People love the version of you that's easy to understand, but evolution demands complexity. It means shedding identities that no longer serve you, even if the world insists on holding on to them. It means outgrowing expectations, even when those expectations came with applause. Because the moment applause starts to define you, you stop listening to yourself. And adversity has a way of silencing the crowd so you can finally hear your own voice again. Sometimes evolution looks like softness after years of sharpness. Sometimes it's the decision to speak louder after a lifetime of swallowing words. It's not always linear. You fall back into old versions of yourself, only to realize they no longer fit. You try on new ones, and they feel too big at first. But growth is like that. It feels awkward before it feels right. The pressure to be the same person forever is suffocating, but adversity gives you the freedom to burn down the parts of yourself that were built for survival, not joy. It says, here, take this pain and do something with it. Don't just carry it, transform it, and in the process you discover layers of yourself that you didn't know were there. Strengths born from sorrow, wisdom carved out of wounds, confidence that doesn't need validation to stand tall. There's a sacredness in being remade by hardship, not because suffering is noble, but because what you create in its aftermath is entirely your own. It's not handed to you, it's not borrowed, it's earned in late nights and lonely days, in tears that no one sees, in the quiet decision to keep going when you have every reason to give up. That kind of growth doesn't fade, it becomes the foundation. The ones who evolve through adversity don't always look like warriors. Sometimes they look soft, gentle, quiet. But don't mistake that for weakness. There's steel under the softness, fire behind the calm. Because when you've been through enough, you stop performing strength and start embodying it. It's not about proving a point anymore. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. Once the noise, the pressure, and the pain peeled everything else away. People often celebrate the comeback, the reinvention, the rise, but what they don't see is the in-between. The version of you that wasn't fully broken, but wasn't whole either. The liminal space where nothing made sense, but everything mattered. That's where the evolution happens. In the stillness, in the silence, in the choice to keep becoming even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. There's something electric about honesty, the kind that doesn't flinch, doesn't sugarcoat, doesn't ask for permission, not the polished kind of honesty that fits inside a quote box or a press release, but the raw kind, the kind that comes with shaky hands and tear-stained cheeks, the kind that lives in the pauses, in the messy middle of a sentence, in the truth that's hard to say but impossible to keep buried. That kind of honesty doesn't just free the person who speaks it, it cracks open the world for everyone listening. Telling the truth, especially when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable, is an act of courage. Not just because it risks judgment, but because it demands vulnerability. And vulnerability, when shared without apology, becomes power. It becomes a mirror for someone else to see themselves more clearly, to realize they aren't alone, that their quiet pain isn't something to hide, but something that connects them to others. That's where the empowerment lives, not in perfection, but in permission. Permission to feel, to fall apart, to begin again. There's a certain kind of strength in saying, this hurt me, or I was lost for a while, or even, I didn't know who I was back then. That kind of confession doesn't make someone smaller, it makes them more expansive, because every truth spoken out loud invites others to look inward and name their own. It breaks the cycle of pretending, of performing, of holding it all together just to make others comfortable. And once someone else sees that kind of honesty, it becomes contagious. It gives them the courage to share their truth too. Honesty isn't about oversharing. It's not about putting everything on display for the sake of drama. It's about knowing your truth so intimately that you can offer it to the world with grace. It's about understanding the difference between exposure and expression, One wounds, the other heals. And when you tell your story from a place of healing, not to seek validation, but to build connection, it becomes a roadmap for someone else. It becomes proof that survival is possible, that transformation is real. Sometimes the most empowering thing a person can do is say, "Me too." Not as a slogan, but as a whisper of solidarity, a quiet nod that says, "I've been there, I made it through." And when that truth is told in a song, in a poem, in a journal entry that somehow makes its way to another person's hands, it becomes a lifeline, because art that tells the truth isn't just beautiful, it's brave. And that bravery is contagious. There's this illusion that honesty makes you soft, that it makes you fragile or overly emotional or weak. But real honesty is forged in fire. It requires standing in front of your own reflection and refusing to look away. It means being accountable for your own story, even the parts that make you wince. And when someone sees you doing that, really doing it, they realize they can too. That's the ripple effect. That's the quiet revolution that honesty begins. When someone turns their wounds into words, into melody, into light, it sends a message louder than any anthem. It says, this is what it looks like to own your story, not to be proud of every part, but to stop running from it. And when that message reaches someone else, someone still stuck in the silence, it pulls them closer to themselves. It tells them that their voice matters, that their pain isn't too much, that their truth, no matter how heavy, deserves to be heard. The most powerful kind of honesty doesn't demand attention, it simply exists. It doesn't chase applause, it holds space. And in holding that space, it creates room for others to do the same. That's how people rise, not by being told what to feel, but by seeing someone else feel it first and live to tell the story. By watching someone wear their truth like armor, not to defend themselves, but to remind the world that softness can be strong and truth can be tender and unbreakable all at once. Turning pain into power isn't a single moment. It's a journey made up of 1,000 small choices. It's choosing to be vulnerable when it would be easier to hide. It's taking back the pen when others try to write your story. It's creating something beautiful from the wreckage, letting your evolution be messy, honest, and real.